Okay, so hey guys, this is our panel on speed running routing, the perfect line. That's a cool reference that maybe you've heard of. We're really funny. So basically, this is kind of just, we kind of wanted this to be a little more casual, just kind of like a, more like sharing stories, but also giving a little bit of advice based on, what we've done in speedrunning and how we've kind of involved ourselves within routing like communities and whatnot. So it's kind of just going to be whatever this panel turns into. We don't really know yet. We've done a little bit of practice, but we kind of just wanted to see where it would go. So if you do have questions at any point, like you can raise your hand and ask or something like that, and we'll get into it. So first, I wanted to start off with introductions here. So hey, I'm Ben. I'm Ben Stevens, 5'6". I run Zelda games mostly handheld. So like Ocarina of Time 3D, Majora's Mask 3D, A Link Between Worlds, and Phantom Hourglass. But I also do a couple other things. I've run like one or two like weird platformers and stuff like that. So that's what I do.
I love Ark, and I also run Zelda games like Breath of the Wild and Ocarina of Time 3D, and I also run some Mario games like Luigi's Mansion.
Hi, I'm Mermilio, just Mermy for short. It's a long name. I run a lot of RPGs. My main games for a while have been Mario RPGs, like Mario and Luigi games and Paper Mario. And I also run Octopath, which is like more of a JRPG, regular turn-based kind of thing.
I'm game stabled. I also do a lot of handheld Zelda, especially OOT 3D, and also Super Mario 3D Land is kind of my other main game. Yep.
So yeah, as you can tell, there's a lot of Zelda here. So like, if you're not into Zelda, I don't want to say that there's nothing here for you, but we tried to include a little bit of everything. But yeah, I'm sorry, there's a Zelda bias.
Our examples will be heavily Zelda biased.
There will be some Zelda, and I don't think that those are bad examples. They might just be more difficult for some people to relate to, but we're trying to kind of hit all the dots, connect all the dots. I don't know, what would you say? Something like that. Anyways, so just to kind of start off here, hey, there's a picture of me. I put that in
nice.
there. Yeah,
You look good.
self-indulgent. So basically, like, kind of what made me want to like suggest this panel. Well, actually, I wasn't the one who suggested it. Varg suggested, but the thing that kind of got me interested was kind of the aspect of like, there's a lot of different kinds of competitive gaming, right? And they all have like the preparation phase, right? Like with Melee or something, like those guys practice like crazy. Just like everything, like you have to practice. You have to be prepared. But with speedrunning, there's kind of like this different element to it. It's very planned out. It's very methodical. You have to know exactly what you want to do going into it. You can't start a speedrun being really good at a game and not knowing what your route's going to be, because you can practice all you want, but if you don't know your route, it's still not going to make it a good speedrun. And that's kind of how I feel that speedrunning separates itself. That's just one of the ways that it separates itself out from like a lot of other types of competitive gaming. And I think that's special because it like kind of forms these communities of people that like don't even run the game, right? Like,
yeah.
We have so many friends that like don't even run the games that we play, but they just sit there like thinking about, routes and this stuff. And like, that's just like a really interesting aspect of it,
Yeah, I think like a lot of people, like, if you know Wayfaring Fox, like
that guy's crazy.
Yeah, he doesn't, I don't see him running the game much, but there are people like him who they know like everything about the game, and they help out a ton of people when they're actually trying to do their runs.
Yeah, and that's not to say that there aren't people out there that do that for other games. And like, I don't feel like I know a whole lot about like just general gaming communities. Like, I don't know much about fighting games besides like Melee, and like I don't really know about like MOBAs or RTSs or anything like that. But like, I'm sure that those people still exist in those communities where it's just like the science people, right? But I think like it's kind of a special thing for speedrunning. I just think the routing communities and and whatnot, that all that goes into it. It's just really it's really special that these people come together and do this kind of stuff. So that's kind of the preface of why routing is kind of like important and why we wanted to have this panel based on it, right? So routing in the old days was like kind of different than it is today. I mean, most, gaming metas, they like change over time and stuff like that. So like, I feel like GameStable, you probably know more about this than me, right?
Yeah, so what we wanted to compare here is kind of how routing has changed over time. So, even maybe 10 years ago, there was kind of an older age of speedrunning where an individual might plan out their route and perform a speedrun using their route. And that it's really something that should be compared to nowadays, where much more time is developed with an entire community making a route. Yeah. like just in the old days, routing was a bit less of a community effort, and that's really, since we're focusing on kind of the community development, we wanted to talk about how that's something that has changed more as time has gone on.
This picture right here is like from a really old Ocarina of Time speedrun done by our boy Pokey. He's great. So this is 2010. Yeah, it's like 9 years ago. And like I'm pretty sure there was some community involvement with this. Like I feel like another one was like Majora's Mask, like Ing-X24, right? I think a lot of that was pretty much just him. And so it's kind of like different because I've actually talked to Ing about this a little bit, and he said that like it was a little different. Like people would like practice speedruns like and routing, and they would just think about this for like weeks, and then they would do like one speedrun, and they'd be like, okay, I'm done. And that was it. And like it's so much different today with like, like the routes develop over time, like much more rapidly. People are constantly thinking about this stuff, and depending on how active communities are, obviously it's case-by-case situation. And then, people like grind runs, and, you learn things from grinding, and then you redevelop the routes through experience. And like, it's kind of just so different than it is today. And some of the reasons that it's changed is, right here. So community involvement. I mean, first off, I don't think it's so much that like we're just getting better at talking to people or it's more so that there's just more people to talk to. Speedrunning kind of, blew up over the past couple of years, and I'm sure GDQ has had a hand in that. But like communities are just getting so much bigger right now. And I mean, they have been for a couple of years. I think that's been a really big influence on kind of the development of the routing scene, because there's just more people to do it. There's more ideas. And I think that's kind of the really interesting thing about routing. There's a lot of creativity involved in it for certain games. I think there are times to be creative for a route in any game. But I think here's the Zelda examples. Zelda has some really good examples of that because at least most of them, the games that we are mostly familiar with, like Ocarina of Time, or at least me and GameStable, you can just do so much in that game. You have so many options that like the routing process is kind of like infinite. Like I don't think there's a limit. I don't think we're ever gonna stop finding better routes for that game ever. I don't think it'll happen. Also, I think we've just gotten better at knowing how important it is to time things. I will get a lot of people asking me like, hey, what do you think's faster, this or this? And I go, well, did you time it? And they usually say no. I think there has been a greater push within communities, or at least the communities I'm in, to kind of document things and time them. What are some good examples of that?
I mean, so the in-depth timing is kind of also a part of the fact that routes are constantly evolving now amongst the whole community. So since small adjustments are being made to routes all the time, This means that it's feasible to time small adjustments and figure out what is actually optimal, whereas it may not be necessarily feasible to test huge route ideas. It's much easier to test like, okay, what's the quickest way through this dungeon, like based off these few ideas, than, you know, sort of planning a whole route at the same time.
And I think part of that has to do, like, again, with the community involvement, because I think the example that's coming to my head right now is like Ocarina of Time 100% had like a big reroute, like, yeah, about a year ago, right? Because they started routing it at AGDQ, right? Pretty sure. And I think Fig was the guy, Fig02, just like went through and just timed literally everything in a 4-hour category. And like, I don't think anyone else was willing to do that. And so I think that was just kind of a matter of like having a large enough community that like just had a member that was that dedicated to actually go and do that. Because I wouldn't have done that. That's way too much work. And then, of course, like practice tools. I mean, all this can be related back to the growing community involvement, but like there have been some like really cool things happening with like practice tools over the past like 3 or 4 years. I mean, they've always been developing, but like what you can do with like emulation and like tool assisted stuff, but also stuff like you know, the OOT practice ROM. I'm sorry, I keep talking about Zelda. I promise there's more than Zelda in here.
Well, to go off of that, like, so I like ran Luigi's Mansion a lot, and we don't have a practice ROM, and so the best thing we have is emulation, but it's not like that accurate. And one problem with that is that you can't like resetting to practice something or like test different ways to do a room in that game is just like, it just takes so long to keep resetting. Whereas like I wish that we had a practice ROM like Zelda where you can like bringing back your position, like resetting position.
I don't even know everything involved.
Or like you can reset the number, like, you know, you can have like infinite bombs or something, which are super important. So,
right. Yeah. So like developments like that are like still happening, and it's just like that makes coming up with new routes like way easier, because like not only does that make timing things easier, but it makes like testing ideas easier. And I think that's important. And testing things easier makes hunting for like new glitches and stuff that are gonna make the route better easier. And I think we'll talk about that later. But yeah, that's kind of it's all connected. It's all connected in one way. Ready to move on? Next one? Okay, cool. So if you just look at these two games up here, right? You would imagine that the routing process for them would probably be really different, right? You'd have to think about it in like, just like totally different ways. And I think you'd be absolutely right if that's what you thought, but there's also probably more similarities in the process than like you might think there are. Because I think that there are still certain things in both of these games that you have to kind of evaluate the same way. And that kind of gets into the idea of like macro routing versus micro routing, which isn't a term that I don't think anyone has used before us, but I'm just gonna call it that because I don't know what else to call it. And that's kind of the idea of like, I don't know, micro routing might be something like, how do you get through a particular stage in Mega Man? And then macro routing would be like, which stage do you do first? What order do you do them in? Stuff like that. And I think they go together, they influence each other, but in order to kind of evaluate them, you kind of like need to think of them as separate entities. You kind of need to get an idea of the big picture before you can really get into how you're going to do the little stuff. And then when you start thinking of the little stuff, that might change the way that you think about the big picture. So we're going to get into that a little bit. So Vark here runs Breath of the Wild, all shrines. And I remember when the game came out, he was like, hey, Ben, do you want to help me route this? And I was like, yeah, sure. But in the back of my head, I was like, that sounds awful. No way, I'm not going to do that. And then he sent me
Thanks
this picture.
for helping me.
He sent me this picture, and I was like, yep, nope, I'm not doing that. So I don't know. Why don't you talk about it? Though?
Yeah. So yeah, like macro. Some examples would be like Ben said, Mega Man. There's, a couple bosses that you have to beat, and you can do them in any order, but sometimes it's faster because in those cases you can like get a weapon there or an upgrade and then use that in another level. And or like Zelda dungeon orders. A lot of Zeldas, they have you do it in a set order, but because of glitches, you can complete them in different orders. Or like A Link Between Worlds, they kind of just let you do whatever you want to do. And when I was thinking about like how did I route all this, because over like a year and a half, I did do most of the routing for Breath of the Wild All Shrines, but like it kept changing because there were other people who were also routing it kind of on their own. And it was kind of funny that we all came up with the same set of things. Like we wanted to do this shrine and then this shrine and then this shrine all in the same order, but they were placed in different parts of the run. So like I might be doing the top right part of the map like 6 hours in, whereas someone's doing it like 3 hours in. And it really came down to these three things of what has to come first, what has to come before the others, and then what should come first. So like if I do this part before this other part, can I get something from an earlier piece to speed up that later portion? So for an example, in Breath of the Wild, there's a place that you can go to get this resource that lets you get speed boost where Link runs ridiculously fast. It's kind of funny. And we get that at the start of the game, and it gives us like 3.5 hours of in-game time of running like 50% faster. And that's not like a requirement. We don't have to do that. And in this route, I actually had it about halfway into the run, or like a third of the way into the run, and it was really slow. But I decided to put it up earlier. And then of course there's trade-offs, because it is slower to get to that piece that has your resources, because in this earlier route there was another upgrade we could get which lets you jump really high basically, and it just turned out that it was faster to first get that speed boost instead of the big jump. So does anyone else have any examples to like big routing?
I'm going to talk about some RPGs, but
We need that. Please
why-
talk
that's
about
why
something
you're
other than
well,
Zelda.
since we're on the Zelda trade, if Game Stable has anything before I like switch it off completely.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, RPGs are usually, they're so different from like Zelda games, for instance. They're usually story-based. They're very linear games to routes. And if they include glitches or anything where you can do big skips in order to skip some story progression, there's usually certain things that you need to do in order to continue on, or else the whole sequence of events will be broken. So like, let's say, this is a really easy example for it. In Paper Mario games, there's certain blocks that you can't break without certain hammer upgrades. So if you can't break that, you just can't enter whatever chapter you're trying to go into, and other things like that. And even if you're able to enter the area, if you haven't completed part of this story progression, you just can't continue on, and you'll be stuck in like a portion of the game where you've only been playing for 10 minutes, but you should have been here when you entered like 6 hours later. So it's really important to order things out where it all makes sense in the game, and the game will still continue to work well. Otherwise, you'll be like trapped in a dead end. You'll have to make everything up somewhere else, and probably just have to reroute the whole thing.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I think the idea of like what must come first, as far as like routing advice goes, and we'll kind of get into this more later, but kind of like a very good first step is to kind of identify the goals, like what are you trying to do? And sometimes that's really obvious. If it's all shrines, in Breath of the Wild, you got to beat all the shrines. If it's, any percent in Super Mario RPG, the goal is usually, actually, I don't know much about Super Mario.
Use a different example.
Yeah, use a different one other than that. What's a good one? Yikes, brother.
Do Paper Mario all cards.
in
Yeah,
Super-
all cards. I like all cards because that's not Zelda. I was thinking all dungeons, but no, I can't do that. Like Paper Mario cards, you have to get all the cards. It's not just beat the game. You have to get all of these things. And so then you start thinking about, what order do we get them in? And it's very good to organize yourself based off of what is possible. Like, what order do they have to come in? No, that's not what I meant. Because obviously that's what you're trying to do. Like you have to think about those moments where it's like, yes, this absolutely has to come before this because the next part isn't possible. And that's kind of a good first way to organize all of that.
I have a good example, I think. So Super Mario 3D Land is a very linear game. You beat all the levels in sequence until you beat Bowser. That's the end.
Super Mario 3D World as well.
But
Both of them.
In Super Mario 3D Land, there are these two bottlenecks. The first one is that you need 50 star medals to enter 5 Castle, and the second is that you need 100 star medals to enter 8 Bowser, the final level. So your macro routing is, okay, I'm going to play through all the levels in order, and I need 50 star medals by 5 Castle, and I need 100 by 8 Bowser, and that's your macro routing process.
Right. And that puts us right into the micro routing because then you start thinking about, okay, once you realize, okay, we need all these coins, which coins are the fastest, then you start thinking about what is the actual fastest way to beat this level in, Super Mario 3D Land, or what is the fastest way to beat a dungeon in Zelda, or what is the fastest way to beat a stage in Mega Man. Once you kind of have the order in which you want to get things done, you start ironing out the minutiae of what exactly you want to happen. And some examples of that are, we said Zelda, how to complete a dungeon. Super Mario 64, if you're doing the 100 coin star. Which coins you're going to get? What order you're going to get them in? You kind of have to start thinking about, the very specific levels. Because obviously, in, Super Mario 64, let's say 120 stars, right? You got to get all the stars. You have to get them. You kind of know what order you want to get them in, but then you just got to think about, yes, this is the particular way I'm going to do this level. You don't care.
They're independent from each other.
Yeah. In that case, I would say they're almost independent of each other, except in that one, you can kind of group the 100 coin star with another star. Right. So that's but I'd say those are almost a really good example of being macro and micro routing, being absolutely divorced from one another. And that's kind of why I'm bringing this up, because I think thinking about that is kind of a good way to start understanding how you need to form a route if you can separate it into its most simplest pieces. And then navigating the void in Pokemon Diamond Pearl. I don't actually, Games Table knows about that one. He put that in here.
So an example is, in Diamond and Pearl glitched any percent. The goal is to get into this out-of-bounds void, and then as soon as you're in the void, you can glitch yourself to the Hall of Fame and watch the credits.
Glitch the game, bro.
Yeah, and but the question is, how do you navigate the void? It's completely irrelevant to the route. But 3 or 4 years ago, this void movement took thousands of steps. It took close to 10 minutes, and now it only takes 200 steps. It's very short. And just the point of the example is that this void movement is completely irrelevant to the rest of the route, but it's one of these micro ideas, something that can be worked on separately from everything else. It's not really a big picture idea.
Do you have anything to say about RPGs?
I think what I will say about this will probably lead in well to the dead ends, which I think is next.
I don't know if that's next, but we'll talk about that.
All right. But yeah, I like to use Octopath as an example for this one, because it's a very open game, especially for RPG standards. You can pick, since there's 8 characters in the game, you can pick whichever 4 you want to get in order to beat it, and you can choose whichever order. But there's certain elements in it where you start one character's chapter, you need to complete it. You can't move on anywhere else. So it's important to know whether or not, oh, I should pick this item up first in order to beat the boss, or this item goes away after I continue this part, so I need to pick this up first as well. And then there's a whole lot of other things with RPGs where, based on turn order within fights or things like that, where you can save like maybe 2 text boxes, but it would change the whole like one chapter. You would have to like go in like 3 different orders for different story progressions throughout that. So, and that's like a big thing for all the chapters in Octopath or most RPGs, whatever sequence you're in.
So that's probably like a pretty good example of like how micro routing and macro routing like are like very much intertwined, very much affected by one another, because it's like this one tiny little thing changes the entire route, because it's like, you know, save 2 seconds. And I think the more optimized routes become, the more important this idea of micro routing becomes, because like now with like Ocarina of Time 100%, we're getting to the point where it's like we're deciding whether it's faster to do like one dungeon before the other based on like, well, you paused 2 less times or something like that. And it's like that's the reason. Or it's like, oh, well, you played this one song 1 less time, so now we're gonna do everything. I remember we did. There was a skip in actually Ocarina of Time 3D 100%, which I keep talking about the N64 version, which is actually the version I know less about. But there was a skip where you could skip a cutscene by playing the Sun Song, which changed the time of day. So certain events only happen during the day, or certain events only happen during the night. And you could skip a cutscene by playing the song. That would change what time of day it was. And just because of this one little change, we had to like totally reroute like 2 hours of a 4-hour category, 4.5 hours at the time, something like that. And like, so that's another really good example of like when micro routing and macro routing are very much like together. But they aren't always. And so that's kind of why, again, it's kind of important to like, maybe when you're first starting off, if routing is very much overwhelming, don't worry about this side of stuff so much. Kind of think about the big picture. And this stuff will eventually come into place, I think. From my experience,
yeah, definitely.
Definitely. Okay. And actually, I think I'm going to skip a couple slides here. I'm going to get to this, the routing process. This is kind of my thing. So this was my route for Phantom Hourglass 100%, which, as far as Zelda goes, is like kind of linear. But like, I just wanted to route this category, and I had no idea where to start. And so pretty much what I did is I made a spreadsheet of like every single thing I needed in the run, and then I put, where do you get this thing? And like, what do you need to get it? Like, what are the minimum requirements to do this thing? And kind of once I had all of that information on a spreadsheet, it became very easy to start copying, pasting, cutting, pasting, moving stuff around, and kind of going, okay, well, I need to do this after this because this is a requirement for that. And like, it was still complicated, but like spreadsheets for routing are like a really good tool that I would say aren't used as much as they should be. I think a lot of people's first inclination is to like open a Google Doc or like a Word document or like a Pastepen and just start like typing out what they want to do. But sometimes, like, again, separating stuff into its most simplest parts is a much easier way to go about thinking about these things.
Yeah, that's what I did.
Yeah. So I think spreadsheets are great. I have started using them a lot more, and they've definitely made things way easier. And again, start with the big picture. Start with macro stuff, and the little stuff kind of comes. And timing, again, time everything. Please don't not time your stuff, and then complain that you don't know what you're doing. Please time it. Please time it. Especially don't come into my chat complaining about that. Okay, I'm going back. All right. Other interesting examples. Oh yeah, so I think the whole thing that like really sparked this idea of like macro and micro routing for me when we initially started talking about what we wanted to talk about in this panel was Super Mario Bros. 1. And like, I don't know how much people know about that in here, but like there's this really cool thing in Super Mario Bros. 1, or at least I think it's really cool, known as the frame rule, which is when it's the bus example. I don't know. You talk about the frame rule, Games Table. You're better at this.
So basically, a new level can only load in increments of 21 frames. For the majority of the run, time can only be gained or lost in terms of 21 frames. So if we're talking about consistency versus speed, there are a number of examples in Super Mario Bros. Where you can say tap left to slightly slow down to make something easier and actually not lose any time because you'll still hit the same frame rule.
And I think the thing that I thought was really interesting about the frame rule is that, like, in Super Mario Bros., like, you're still pretty much doing the level the fastest way possible. Like, you will start the level, if you do it the most optimal way, that's kind of the micro side of things, is like, you have to beat the level in the fastest way possible, and like you kind of manipulate the frame rule. You don't manipulate. That's a bad way to talk about it. That's like word garbage.
You're abusing it. Like or like
Right, it's very much in mind when you're doing the level the fastest way, when you're doing like flagpole glitch or something like that. But what I think is really interesting is that even though you're still kind of beating the same levels the same way every single time, the frame rule also affects something else. It affects where enemies are positioned in the levels and how they work, what they do. So if you are on a certain frame rule, right? So if you start the game at the same time, the Hammer Bro is always going to throw his hammer at the exact same time. And there's a really cool glitch known as the bullet bill glitch, where if you get a bullet bill to fire out and you can jump on it when you hit a flagpole, you can get a flagpole glitch and save 2 frame rules? Optimally, yeah, 2 frame rules. And so, like, even though you're still doing all the levels the fastest way possible, like, kind of the macro picture of it in your head is that what you do actually is you wait on the title screen for like a couple of seconds so that you can get on the proper frame rule so you can get the bullet bill to fire. So even a game as simple, as I said, like I showed the picture at the very beginning, what's the difference between Breath of the Wild and Super Mario Bros. Even a game as simple as Super Mario Bros. Still has kind of this big picture mindset, you know, like what frame rule do we want to be on and that kind of stuff. So like, I just think that's super cool. Like that's like, there isn't even like any advice or like wisdom there. I just think that's really cool. And then I'm sorry, I'm picking on you, Games Table, but the Mario Sunshine cutscene, I think this is really cool too.
Yeah, so a personal favorite routing history example of mine is Mario Sunshine cutscenes. So in Mario Sunshine, there's 7 worlds, and in each world you have to beat the 7th episode, and then you gain access to the final level and you can beat the game. Historically, until about 2012, you would just unlock the worlds basically in order with some nuance and just complete each world and then move on to the next world. But it was noticed in 2012, I think, that so there are these cutscenes that play sometimes after you beat a level that like reintroduce you to what you've unlocked now. If there's new stuff going on in Delfino Plaza. And somebody thought about it really hard and realized, hey, if we unlock these things now, we don't have to watch those cutscenes anymore. And it was timed, and it turns out it's actually quite a bit faster to break worlds into pieces. Like, say, do some of Bianco Hills now, then go unlock Rico Harbor, so you don't have to watch its cutscenes anymore. Since you watch so many fewer of these cutscenes, it's actually faster to have the extra movement of breaking up worlds into multiple visits, which is actually really surprising, but it is quite a bit faster. And I thought that was
I think like especially in 100%, right? Like you
but
go and like
100% route is very
you get rid of
surprising.
all of the like episode or all those little cutscenes, and then it just loads right away.
Yeah, so in 100%, once you visit Corona Mountain, all of these cutscenes are just gone. So very surprisingly, the 100% route makes a very good point of unlocking Corona Mountain as soon as possible, which you would not think, naively, you would not think would be very fast.
Right. And again, that kind of ties into the whole idea of like big picture versus little picture, because you're pretty much always going to beat the levels the same way, regardless of what order you do them in, right? You're still going to do Bianca Hills 1 the same way every single time, no matter whether you're doing it after this level or before another level, right? But like the order in which you do them is like kind of interesting. I'd say that's a case where the big picture matters kind of less than like the individual levels, right? I don't know. It doesn't matter. I don't know.
It's kind of like zero effort almost, because you just kind of like think about it like, oh yeah, that's what I'm gonna do, and then
once again, I just think that's a really cool example. I don't know if there's any wisdom there. It's just really cool.
it is cool.
And then something that's come up recently is like, well, not like super duper recently, but kind of more so, is like this improv routing, right? Like you can get really good at like, so I've kind of heard, and sometimes I say this myself, but like the big randomizer craze that's going on right now. You know, I've often sometimes heard people say like, well, how can you be good at randomizer? Because it's random, right? Isn't that just luck? And, you know, there's still like this element of like, how do you know to on the fly, like assess the situation and kind of go from there? And I think, you know, bingos have been around for a really long time, and that's probably what I have more experience talking about. But like improv routing has become like a pretty big thing recently, I think, with the explosion of randomizer. I think that's interesting. And again, I would say I don't really know a whole lot. I'm not really good at this. I don't really have a whole lot of wisdom on this one, but it's like,
Well, I think it's really interesting for races, because
Right.
when I think of, say, like I play Melee, and when I think of that, there's a lot of people that are kind of like in that skill range, and you don't know who's gonna win. But sometimes in races, it's just there's a leaderboard for it that says like this person has a better time than them, so you can kind of see like where the skill gap is. Like it's a definite skill gap, even though there is consistency. But with
Right.
like a randomizer, it's, you know, everything is random, so with each seed that you play, there's going to be some variance.
right. And so like that's just and I think a lot of like how getting better at like improv routing is really just learning about the game and just doing races or specific examples of it. It's like if you want to get good at bingo, you just got to do a lot of bingo, I think, right? You got to watch a lot of obscure YouTube videos and do a lot of bingo.
And something that comes into play a lot with bingo, especially out of this list, I think, is the idea of what am I personally good at? If you have an established route, you might practice everything, get good at that ahead of time. With bingo, you might not necessarily know how to do everything on the card so well. You might have certain areas of the game that you're more familiar with, and that will make a huge difference in what route you choose for this race. It's something that comes into play that I don't think comes into play quite as much with more traditional routing.
Yeah, and I think I want to talk about mistakes a lot. Not necessarily mistakes, but also how you deal with RNG. It's probably something that goes really well with RPGs because RPGs usually have a lot of RNG combined with them, whether it be wherever you get a random encounter, which is a lot of certain RPGs, or what turn order you get and what attack enemies use. And there's usually, you already know going into whatever fight you're doing what options the boss or enemy can use and how you're going to deal with them. But sometimes unexpected things happen in certain orders where you would have to make sure, since this character is going first, I need to make sure to use this on turn 3 instead of turn 2. Or I got this attack right now, I need to instantly heal instead of setting up for whatever attacks you do. And then the same goes for mistakes. If you accidentally do something, there's a lot of times some way to save it, whether it is taking extra turns, which will cause time loss, but it's always better than to just say give up and not try and continue.
I think I have a good example of this. So I did an Ocarina of Time 3D run at AGDQ 2017.
Can we see the picture again?
Yeah, when you see the picture, yeah. No, I'm gonna do a subtle brag here anyway. So yeah, look at me. There I am. Aren't I so cool? God. Anyways, so I did this run, and it was kind of this really crazy new route that had been found after my run had already been accepted. And I was kind of like, am I going to do this? Like, and I'm like, it's way too cool not to do. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this new route. And it had this really, like, so there were still a whole lot of elements, I guess, on the micro routing side that were very, very similar. That were like, okay, you're still pretty much doing this dungeon in the same way. You're kind of just doing it in a different order. There were still a lot of elements that were very similar. But there was one thing, it kind of seems like a minor thing in retrospect, but it was like crucial to the entire route, and I forgot to do it. And if you forget to do this particular thing, it was setting Furor's Wind in Ocarina of Time, which is like an item that lets you set a warp point and then return to it later. And you can use that to do a whole bunch of crazy glitches. And so you do what is known as the Door of Time skip, where you get behind the Door of Time in Temple of Time to get the Master Sword to go adult early, because of course Ocarina of Time has the adult child. But in Ocarina of Time 3D, getting back behind the Door of Time after you've done it the first time is really hard. And like, you have to jump through so many hoops. And so I was supposed to set Furor's Wind behind the Door of Time after I got the Master Sword to like get back there later, and I just didn't do it. So I needed to figure out a way in like 5 minutes to like completely reroute the entire like run, and it was awful, but also like kind of exhilarating. I don't know. And so I can tell you firsthand that the only reason I was able to reroute that is because I just know a lot about that game. So knowledge is very important for routing. And there were also people on the couch. I kind of Fox. Yeah, Fox was there. I turned around and I was like, "Hey, what should I do? How do I fix this?" And so like, if you are trying to route something, like, talk to other people about it. That's kind of going back to that. Like, work with other people. People have different ideas, and sometimes you might look at something way different than someone else looks at it. Sorry, subtle brag. I just love that story.
I was freaking out when that happened.
I was so scared. Okay. So task routing is like kind of a whole different way of thinking about routing, because I think the micro side of things is way more important. Well, I mean, I think it's always important, but like, I would say people often give more thought to it. No? Okay.
Yeah, well,
I don't know.
Okay, well, there's never like not micro, because some people do like individual levels where you don't have to think about the macro. So
Okay.
there's always going to be micro.
But yeah, I don't know if I really have a whole lot to say about this one, but like, it's just, I think the way we think about task routing might be like slightly different, and sometimes tasks have different routes because it's like some things are just not like really humanly possible. Like, you just couldn't do it, or you wouldn't want to do it if you could. I don't know. I actually have a really cool video. I'm gonna go back.
You have to get out of the presentation
Yeah,
and copy it.
Get out of the presentation. Do I have to copy it? Oh yeah.
It doesn't look like
Is
the link.
Tree here?
Is Tree here? I don't know.
Ah,
All right, I'm gonna copy it. And
thank you for the example.
Okay. So okay.
Undo.
Oh, this is a.
It's not control, it's command.
It's command. Okay. All right, there we go. MacBooks. Yikes. Okay. Okay. So this is. I'm gonna pause it when it opens. This is a task competition for. Oh, I didn't want to start playing that. This is a task competition for Majora's Mask. I think. What is the task?
Do something.
Oh, you have to do something.
Start
Okay.
somewhere and get somewhere else.
I think you.
Tree, what was
Here
it?
it is. Okay, you have to enter the clock tower in Majora's Mask, where like the Happy Mask salesman's jumping around. you have to open a deku nut chest in like a particular place at the start of the game, and go around masking his band. So it's like a really easy. It's like you have to start here. You have to get this thing. Like that's all there is to it, right? And so these are like the top 4 submissions, and they're all really different. And that's why I think like this is just really cool. So I'm just gonna show this. It's good music. So like you're gonna notice every single one is doing something very different, especially the bottom one, or the bottom right. That one's like really goofy, and I'll kind of explain that one later.
So,
Yeah.
so the one on the bottom right.
That's not actually the gameplay. You'll see the gameplay in a second.
The gameplay is the black screen.
Yeah, so that's actually what's going on. And so this was like a series of tasks, or like tasks. That's hard to say. That were like, so there were multiple tasks. Okay, there it is. Yeah. So you'll notice he has a lot of parts. And so what he's doing right now is actually banned in all the later tasks because it kind of just ruined everything. So Majora's Mask has this glitch where you can dupe a bunch of heart pieces, right? And if you get around like 160 to 180 or something, like hearts on your HUD, what actually happens is if you target or pull out like a first-person item, like the hook shot or the bow or something, the graphics will actually just freeze and it'll run at like 3 times the speed. So that in the bottom right corner, like the really tiny one, was just like a visual representation of what was going on. But because like the graphics weren't updating, like you can't actually see what was going on. So that pretty much ruined, like they had to ban that instantly. And the guy who was in charge of like the task competition was like, why would you do this to me? Why would you make me have to ban this? Why did you go there? So I don't know. That's just cool. But the point is, task competitions, you can do some wild stuff. How do I? It's under view. Oh, okay. Yep. There we go. Okay. So yeah, you can do some really cool stuff in tasking. I really like it. And I love that example. I spent like an hour trying to find that video because I couldn't remember which one it was. And I was like, I have to show this one. And so then there's kind of this idea of like glitch hunting and routing, right? So like if you find a new glitch, how does that affect the route? I kind of talked about that earlier with like, we could play the Sun song, but it like changed everything because we found that new glitch. But then I think what's more interesting is like building theory routes. And the reason I put the bomb chew up there is because for Ocarina of Time 3D, there's this huge, what's the word? Bottleneck in routing, where it's like the most important item pretty much is to get like bombs or bomb chews, and there's just like no way to get these fast. Like, and we've come up with like somewhere between like 20 and 30 different like theoretical ways that it's possible on N64 to do it, that just like none of them work on the 3D version for like one really stupid reason that like no one knew about until like the moment when we had considered it.
We've had so many eureka moments. So many.
Like an hour later, we're so disappointed.
And they never work.
But like the thing is we have so many different routing ideas for if/when we eventually find a way to do this. Like we have like written routes for like, if we could do this, then like it would be really fast, but then we just cry because we're like, well, we can't. It upsets me a lot.
Yeah. One that comes to mind is like Wind Waker and Wind Waker HD with barrier skip. Like people knew what they want to do if barrier skip is found, and then like it finally happened, and that was kind of annoying with the ferry.
That was fun. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
No. I knew you were gonna say something. Thanks, Jim. Jim said no. I have to speak then to the mic so that the VOD gets it. Okay, we got that. Pay no attention to that. And sometimes you come up with those theory routes or even like legit routes, and you're like, oh yeah, I have this really good idea for this route, and it's gonna be so great, and it's gonna be so fast. And then you start playing through it, and then you realize at some point that you overlooked a very critical detail, and it just doesn't work.
This happens a lot in bingo.
This happens a lot.
To me, at least.
It happens a lot in like bingo, like OT bingo, at least to me. I think almost every single time that Games Tabled and I have done a bingo together, we both kind of have like similar ideas of like what we want to do. And then like at the same time, we both go, wait, we forgot about ... And
Yeah, I was playing a bingo with you two in OT 3D, and I was like, dude, I'm doing so well right now, and like my last thing I need is this. And then GameStay was like, wait, but you want adult, and you need to go back to child. I'm like, oh, okay.
and it's just like,
It's over for me.
again, I don't know if I have any wisdom on this, but like, I guess if you hit a dead end, just don't give up. It's discouraging. We've been there. It sucks.
You learn something along the way.
You always usually learn something, and you'll probably, hopefully, never make that same mistake again. Yeah, but that's kind of just like a funny anecdotal thing. Conclusions: speedrunning is cool. Video games are great. We all like gaming. I see some gamers in the crowd here. Sorry. And I think routing and like routing communities is kind of something that really sets the speedrunning community apart. And I think, I don't want to sound pretentious, but I think routing is like kind of an art form. I think like, I know some people who are just really, really good at it. Bringing back Wayfaring Fox, that guy is insane. And I think there's just something really cool about being good at routing. I wish I was better. I feel like I'm decent, but I wish I was better. And, you know, I think it just takes practice. I think you just got to think about it. And if you're struggling with routing, this presentation probably didn't help you.
We all learned something.
But, you know, hopefully you learned something. And hopefully maybe you can think about things in a different way. And hopefully you can time stuff when you don't know if it's faster. Please time your things. Do you guys have anything else to add?
If you can find early explosive in OT3D, you really should.
Yeah, please do that.
Yeah.
Please. Okay, yeah, I think that's the end of our presentation. So again, like there wasn't a whole lot of wisdom or anything like that. So like, I don't think people like. If you have questions, great. I don't expect anyone to, but please, if you have questions, come up to the mic in front so that we can hear them on the video when this gets uploaded.
Yeah, I actually have two questions if you don't mind.
Okay, yeah.
The first one starts off with the interesting fact. Just this year, there was a paper published from the University of Ottawa in Canada titled "The Complexity of Speedrunning Video Games."
Okay.
And they actually algorithmically proved that routing and speedrunning is NP hard, which is just a fancy word for saying computers can't do it. Has there been any attempts to use computational advanced methods or kind of AI to route games in speedrunning?
So I hear a lot of people talk about this actually. Like I've had people ask me, especially when Breath of the Wild came out and we were talking about like doing all of the shrines. And the easy answer is no one has really tried to do this, but people have definitely like thought about it. Like, and there have been attempts to, I mean, pretty much the best that we can do right now, and I think there was some attempt at this, is to kind of break things down into easier ways. So like, how far are the shrines apart from each other? What is the literal shortest distance that you can travel? It might not be the fastest way to do it, but like that might at least be a start. You would be able to calculate that. And that can still be very helpful information, but it's not going to be the end all.
Okay. Yeah, it's been mathematically proven. That's too hard for computers.
Yes.
Just to let you know.
Yeah,
There are.
My second question is, so when you talk about glitch hunting, and especially with Wind Waker's barrier skip, since I kind of have a background in computer science, I find a lot of similarities between how speedrunners glitch hunt and how hackers hack into cybersecurity systems. Okay. Has the word hacking been used or thrown around in speedrunning, or is that kind of something you try to keep separate?
We we like to avoid saying the word hacking because we want to make it very clear that glitches are not hacking. That
Right.
they are. So we avoid that word usually.
It's kind of more of a notation thing because hacks are usually applied for like if you made a ROM hack, right, where like you are literally changing the game's code. You are going in and you are changing the game. You're not working with what you already have, but you're going in and making changes to it. That's kind of more what we associate hacking to, and it's kind of more of just a like a vocabulary thing. Like you could probably use the word hacking. We just usually choose not to because it gets confusing with that stuff.
There are certainly examples in like recent like Super Mario 64 glitch hunting. I've literally seen like decompiled code and stuff that people are starting to look at to find weird behaviors with like enemy AI and such. So there are definitely similarities, especially heading into modern years.
Yeah, I think that's probably the closest you get. But I'd still say most people usually shy away from that term just because it could kind of mean a whole lot of other things.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Great questions.
Into the mic, please.
Yeah, say it like.
A little short for this. Yeah, so I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with Rob Dog. Anyone in the OOT community, I'm sure knows Rob Dog. He was a very big proponent in finding wrong work for any percent. He also did a ton for the Paper Mario community, and he actually made a bot that has all of the timings for movement and getting items in the Paper Mario bingo, and it actually routes out an optimal route, quote optimal. It's not actually optimal, obviously, because of how many different ways you can do everything. But it routes out a, quote, optimal route based on all of the timings he put into it for every single row and column in a bingo. So that's like the closest thing that I know of to like having AI route something for you. But it's not really like a route. It's just telling you, get this, get this, get this, get this, this order. That's
Right.
it.
And I think bingo is also, they try to make it so that most of them are kind of similar, right?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, Paper Mario Bingo, it's not been like super delved into very much. Like it's pretty niche. Not a whole lot of people play it, but I just thought I'd add that.
No, I think that's really interesting. I didn't know about that. Yeah, I'd say that's getting there. I mean, it's still like definitely not like AI because it's just like, it's kind of just like this is faster than this. It's not really like going in and
Another funny story that you remind me of, similar to something we talked about earlier. That Rob Dog, the person you mentioned, was the first person to write an OOT 3D 100% speedrun route, and at the time he had never played the game.
It was like. I really appreciate the fact that he did it because no one else wanted to do it.
There were some details that he didn't know were changed.
Yeah, there was some. It was a little rough, but.
But
thank
it
you
was
to
a
him
great
for doing
starting
it.
place.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
I guess this is mostly related to the hard NP problem that you mentioned. So I guess in theory, like going back to the all shrines route in Breath of the Wild, right? In theory, you could break it down into many small traveling salesman problems, but I'm pretty sure each. This is what I'm getting at. I guess so. I presume you guys know about the traveling sales problem. Is it traveling salesman problem? So, I mean, maybe people can go and look at it.
Yes.
Oh, good.
I think I have an idea. Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess people can look it up a bit later on to get a bit more information about it. But essentially, I think it's extremely computationally expensive to solve even small systems. So it doesn't seem that illogical that the Ottawa study that was mentioned can't find solutions for a lot of video games unless you broke it down into really tiny macro routes. So this goes back to what you guys are talking about.
Yeah, definitely. We do have one theoretical hope, though, potentially, is that a speedrun usually has a defined start and end state. And there are much more efficient, shortest path finding algorithms in that situation.
Right.
I think
It's still computationally not realistic, but
I think another good example of this, and I think we have to be done after this, but I think Sock Folder And other people have done this before. Sockfolder is a guy who has done a lot for the speedrunning community, a lot of tools. And he did a lot for Super Mario Bros. And he actually kind of made a bot that he never like actually finished it, I don't think, but it used like generational learning to kind of like beat the level. I don't think he ever got it to beat the level fast, but he did create a bot that learned how to beat like a couple of levels of Super Mario Bros. So
And
like that's a start.
I believe his flagpole glitch setup, I could be wrong on this, I believe it was brute forced.
It was brute forced by a bot, right? He
Yeah.
created a
Which is
bot
still cool.
that brute
Yeah.
forced a very, very precise setup for a trick that has like multiple frame perfect, sub-pixel perfect inputs. So yeah. So the tools are definitely coming, and there are some amazing people working on them, but we're definitely not there yet. Maybe one day. Okay, yeah, I think I have to wrap it up. So thanks everyone for coming, and thanks for the questions as well in the comments. I really appreciate them.